Hello, it's Simon Zutshi here, and in this property education video, I want to share with you what I would do if I went back to the beginning of my property investing journey and I was starting from scratch in 2024. So if you want to get into property investing, listen very carefully, because what I'm going to do, I'm going to share with you what I did when I first started and how I would do things differently knowing what I know now. And I've been investing almost 30 years. I started back in 1995. I've been teaching people like you how to be a success investor for 20 years. So I've helped a lot of people achieve financial freedom from their property investing much quicker than I did it, because I was doing it on my own. So let me go back to, first of all, how I started. So in 1995, I'd graduated from the University of Birmingham with a manufacturing engineering and business studies degree. It was a 4-year degree, but I came out in 94 not having a job. So I really focused and I found what was my perfect graduate job at Cadbury's in Birmingham as an operations graduate. And as soon as I got my job offer, I started looking for a house to buy. I'd been sharing as a student, and then once I'd finished university, I'd been sharing a house, and I really wanted to get my foot on the ladder. I wanted to get my own home. Now, none of my family had ever really invested in property apart from their own homes, but I'd met my very first landlord a few years before, and it put an idea in my head. I thought I'd actually, one day, when I'm wealthy, like to get lots of property. That was my thinking at the time. Now, having been at university and having been in debt, I didn't have any money for a deposit, but I had to get a 5% deposit to buy my very first property. I was able to borrow that from a family member. It wasn't a gift, it was a loan. I paid it back with interest, and I was able to get a 95% mortgage because I had a really good job. Now, thinking about 2024, well, actually, the property prices back then were, I think, £48,500 I paid for that very first property back in 1995. Almost 30 years on, the property prices are 7 or 8 times as much in that particular area. Now, my starting salary is probably double what it was when I first started. So salaries have only doubled, and yet the property prices have gone up 7 or 8 times. So I'm not sure I'd be able to do it the way I did it when I first started. So there's another way I'd do it right now. And it's with some of the knowledge I've gained over the years. And one of my favorite property investing tools is what we call a lease option. And this is where you can control a property and you get the benefit of cash flow and potential equity growth without actually having to buy it. And that's pretty good because it means you don't put a deposit in and you don't have to get a mortgage either. So what I would do, I would go and look for landlords in the area in which I wanted to buy, and that was in Selly Oak next to Birmingham University. And I would look for some tired or retiring landlords. Now, I lived in a student area, and the reality is in most student areas, there are lots of student HMOs, and there's usually an oversupply of accommodation. And what happens is the properties that are slightly further away from the university, or the ones that are in not such good condition, those are the ones that don't find tenants, so they're obviously empty. So you can approach a landlord who's got an empty property, and the interesting thing about HMO landlords that rent to students, often they think that all HMO tenants are going to be students. They don't realise there are other types of people who might live in an HMO, because they think, well, once someone's graduated, they're surely going to go off and get their own house or apartment and live on their own or with a partner. That's not necessarily the case. In fact, when you're doing HMOs, students are just one of 4 types of tenants in that kind of property. The next type is what we call young professional, and that's someone who's been to university, they've got a really good job, and maybe they've moved to another city to get that good job, and they don't know anyone, so moving into a shared house is a great way of living much cheaper than if they were living on their own, because they'd have to pay rent and the bills, whereas in an HMO it's generally included, and also it's a great way to have a bit of an instant social life. Now, in my situation, I'd lived with other people for a number of years as a student, and I had a couple of my friends who were also staying in Birmingham who were actually continuing their study at university. One of them was doing a law degree, and one was doing a PhD in astrophysics, I think it was. So I had 2 friends who liked the idea of living with me in the house that I was buying. So I bought a property for £48,500. The rent that my 2 friends paid me pretty much covered the mortgage and the bills, so I kind of lived for free. And I started saving my salary, and I had a part-time business saving my deposits to buy my next property, which I did in 1998. I moved into that second property, I retained the first one, and I started renting out to students who are studying at Birmingham University. So here's what I do different now. Instead of buying that first property and even the second property, I would use purchase lease options. I'd find people who got a property they didn't really want. I'd move into that. I'd get a management agreement, so I would move in as a tenant, but I could also write ASTs to other people. So it's not subletting, all done properly. And I would then, the cash flow that comes in from those 2 or 3 tenants would be enough to pay the mortgage and the bills. Now, I'd probably try to get a property that's got enough for 4 people to live there instead of 3, which is what I had initially, because that extra person, that extra rent will help cover some of the bills. And also, you can go up to 4 people in most areas and not have to register as an HMO. If you had 5 or more tenants in most areas, you have to get an HMO license, lots of things you need to do, but you don't need to do that if it's just 4 people. Now, of course, you want to make sure the property is safe, fire doors, those kind of things. But if you're buying from an existing landlord, very often they have a lot of those things in place anyway. Most landlords who are retiring have tired properties. They haven't kept up with the market rent. They haven't kept up with the decor and furnishings that are required in the current market, and so that's why their properties may be unlet. But I would move in, I'd spend my weekends painting it, getting it set up, and I'm sure my friends would help and muck in as well. So that's how I'd get my foot on the property ladder without actually buying a property, without having to put down a big deposit, and also without having to get a mortgage, which is quite difficult at the moment. You know, affordability is a real issue, but if you're not getting a mortgage, it's not a problem. So the current owner still owns the property, but I control the property on this purchase lease option. Now that's the strategy I would use to get my foot on the ladder. But I wouldn't stop there. Back in 1995, I used all my money and other people's to buy that first property, and I had to wait 3 years until I had enough deposit to buy my next property. I wouldn't have to wait if I was using options. I'd go and find another landlord with another property. Now, I'm living in the first one, obviously. My second property, I would just rent out to young professionals or other types of tenants in an HMO and hopefully generate cash flow from that. And I'd keep going to grow my portfolio much quicker than the 8 years it took me to replace my income. So that's what I was doing if I was starting from now. I'd absolutely find a property to move into, rent out some of them to some of my friends, because at that kind of age, that's a great strategy. If you've got family and kids, a little bit different, but if you're starting off right now, that's definitely how I would start. Then I'd get other properties to give me cash flow so I can actually create income, and then I can invest some of that income in properties I need to buy. Now, well, what happens at the end of the 5 or 7 year option agreement? Well, a couple of things. You could buy that property and you'd buy it at the price you agreed. Now, you might have agreed to buy it 300. 7 years from now, it might be 350, 400. Guess what? You get to buy at the price you've agreed. So you benefit from that capital growth over the option period as well. Sometimes we can use some of that capital growth to act as a deposit. You can go to a bridging company, they'll lend you money based on the value, not necessarily the purchase price, which means when you actually buy, you don't need to put a huge amount of money in. Or there might be a number of properties that you've taken on option. And the great thing about an option is you get to try before you buy. Look, I've been investing almost 30 years now, and I can tell you, over that time, I've definitely bought a few properties, which, if I had my time again, I probably wouldn't buy those properties. They might have seemed like a great idea at the time, but with a bit of hindsight and having tried them out, they weren't such good deals. The great thing about an option, you get to try before you buy. So there'll be some you might take on as options which are great, and some that are not so good. The ones that are not so good, if they've had some good capital growth, you can potentially sell them on to someone else. Now, you don't own them, but you control them. And let's say you've agreed a price to the owner and you sell it at a higher price, you get the difference. So some of the options you take on, you could sell them, you would have to pay tax on that obviously, but the profit you make after tax can be used as the deposits for the ones you want to keep. So really, if you understand how to do this properly, this is a great strategy. I call it the no deposit, no mortgage strategy. Most people are completely unaware of purchase lease options and lease option agreements. Those people who do know about it often don't really understand it. If they understood it, they would have done an option deal themselves. Most people have not done option deals. We've got hundreds and hundreds of my students who've been taught how to do it properly. They understand it, they've got the tools, they've got the knowledge, and they've gone out and found these people who are happy to go into options. Now you might think, well, why on earth would an owner do that? Remember, we're looking for someone who wants to get rid of their property. They don't want the hassle, they don't want the responsibility, they just want to get rid of it. They want to sell. But maybe it's not such a good time to sell right now. Prices are coming down a bit. They're going to have to sell at a lower price. We could actually give them the full market value instead of trying to get a discount. because today's full market price might well be discounted compared to the future value. So we can take away the hassle. They can go off and not have to worry about the property anymore. We look after it, we're responsible for it, just as you would be if you own the property, but we benefit from cash flow and also potential equity growth. So when done correctly, when you find the right kind of seller, someone who doesn't need the money now, but just want to get away from the hassle, this can be an incredibly powerful strategy. Now, I've got some online training that's completely free of charge all about this. If you're intrigued by this thing, I need to know more, if you want to get your foot on that, or even if you're an experienced landlord and you want to buy more property, why put down a deposit and get a mortgage if you don't have to? And these transactions can be done very, very quickly. One of my students who's learned this, she's just completed a deal in 9 days. From agreeing a deal to get it all done, 9 days. It takes months and months for a mortgage. So once you've found someone for whom this works, and by the way, most sellers are not going to want to do this. Maybe only about 5% of sellers, but we can teach you how to find those 5%. When you find the right people, this can be a fantastic win-win deal. So if you want to join me on this online training, look for the link below, come and click on that, come and register and find out how you can use this no mortgage, no deposit strategy. It's incredibly powerful. Most people don't know about it, so you get a real competitive advantage when using it. I do hope this video has been useful and inspiring. If you like it, press the like, put a comment below if you want. I'll come and answer as many as I can. Also, make sure you subscribe to this channel because I bring out regular videos. Some of them are timely, some of them are strategies, some are case studies, etc. This will help build your investing knowledge and confidence and help you become a more successful investor. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified anytime a new video comes out. Until next time, I encourage you to invest with knowledge, invest with skill. Click on the link below, come and join me on the online training. Hey, it's Simon here. I do hope you've just enjoyed that video on YouTube. I hope you took lots of notes and more importantly, you're going to take action. And what I'd encourage you to do is click on the link in the description below the video. I've got some live online training that's very relevant to the video you've just watched. Come and register for that training, join me live online, and you can actually get your questions answered live as part of that training. So take the opportunity to come and join me live online, click on the link below and secure your spot before you miss the date. Take action right now. As ever, I encourage you to invest in knowledge, invest with skill. Enjoy the next video.